Hi everyone, it's Ellie from the Curious Geographer. Welcome to this live interview where we're going to be talking about GIS. So what is ArcGIS? How is it useful for A-level geography? And also we're going to be talking about NEAs, which I know will be super useful, hopefully, for a lot of A-level students who might be kind of going through that process now. If you haven't already said say hi in the comments. And also this is the update of like what's going on over the next couple of months, well, couple of weeks going to Christmas as well. So lots of exciting things. So you can download that. That should be in the comments below. So today we are joined by Dr. Katie Hull, who is a bit of an amazing role model when it comes to GIS. She's going to tell us a bit about what she does and what her role is. And we're going to understand later a bit like how she got there, but really discuss what's going on with GIS. So Katie, if you could introduce yourself to us and tell us a little bit about your role, that'd be fantastic.
Sure. Hey folks, it's really lovely to get this opportunity to speak to you. So thank you ever so much to the Curious Geographer for inviting me to come and talk. So I currently work for a software company called Esri UK, and we'll get into a little bit about exactly the kind of software they make, I think, later in this conversation. But I just sort of wanted to address how odd it can seem that somebody from a geography background is working for a software company. Because I certainly thought before I took on this role, software companies are about computer programmers and software engineers, and they kind of, make computer programs. But actually, what's really interesting is that Esri UK, we do have some kind of developers and software engineers that make the program itself, but we've also got lots of other people that are working in roles in the business that do have kind of a big geography connection. So as well as the people that actually make the software, there are people that use it. So kind of clients will come to us and say, we've got a problem, like we need to know, where all of the power lines are being knocked down by lightning strikes. And there are people within our business that then use the technology to actually come up with solutions for them. There are other people that figure out how to train people so that they can use the software better for themselves. And there's also things like sales roles and marketing roles. So there's lots of people that kind of work in the software industry that aren't necessarily sort of computer programmers by their sort of first degree or kind of qualifications. And that's me. That's kind of how I've got into this. So my role, I am, always really passionate talking about, because I feel like I get the best of everything. I get to do kind of like dabbling and figuring out how the software can be used to solve particular geography problems. I get to think about, in particular, sort of how we use it to teach geography, and I get to do quite a bit of training of people as well in terms of how to use it, because I work as part of the education team, and so we're generally engaging with teachers and sometimes sort of school students as well, and into the university sector quite widely. So we get to kind of do all of that as our day job and get to talk to all the other people in the business about what they do as well. So that's kind of that's who I am and where I'm at.
Brilliant. And you've kind of mentioned kind of why GIS is useful to like different people as well and different stakeholders. But for geographers in particular, why are we mapping online? What can it tell us? Why do we want to use it as geographers?
So I think it's probably worth just kind of unpicking a little bit what GIS actually is as well. So GIS, it stands for Geographical Information Systems, but that in and of itself doesn't necessarily tell us very much about it. Basically, I would say a GIS tells you all about where things are happening, and where things are happening is becoming more and more important for the way that we kind of run our everyday life. So data goes into a GIS and it kind of collects it, stores it, and it analyzes it, and then it can create outputs that help other people to understand that data. So that's often why we tend to think about GIS as something that makes maps, but really it's doing a lot more than that. So kind of examples from your everyday life, you might not realize it, but you're sort of touching GIS technology all the time. It's like if you caught the tube this morning, or if you scanned your reward card sort of at the supermarket checkout, if you sat down and watched an episode of The Witcher on Netflix, or if you've ever seen the Disney movie Zootopia, all of those involved GIS systems in their day-to-day kind of working. So sort of in terms of kind of what it does, it's all about sort of bringing together that data and telling people where stuff is happening. So probably sort of one of the most current examples at the moment, if I just sort of share what I've got on my computer screen. So hopefully you can all see this is the quite famous COVID-19 dashboard at the moment that was initially put together by Johns Hopkins University. So this is taking data in from governments all around the world. They're sort of reporting the raw figures of what's been happening in their different countries. And then the GIS technology is actually interpreting that and presenting it to us in a way that's kind of human readable and human understandable. You know, if we just got a massive list of kind of numbers, it would be really difficult for us to actually see where are the hotspots, you know, where are the areas where there are quite large numbers of infections at the moment, and where is kind of quieter in terms of what's happening. So GIS kind of, you know, builds this digital twin of the real world that we can then interrogate and that we can showcase to other people. So in terms of what it's useful for as a geographer, kind of anything that you can imagine almost, as long as there's this element of needing to know where stuff is. So the COVID-19 kind of crisis is one example where GIS is being used to track what's happening, but there's thousands and thousands of others. So another one that I sort of really like in terms of its impact on humans and kind of working to save lives ultimately, when there was the horrendous hurricane that hit Puerto Rico, in the sort of aftermath of that, a lot of people's power got knocked out, and so it wasn't easy for people to just sort of pick up a phone and call the emergency services anymore because the lines had gone down. But actually, most people in their pocket had something like a mobile phone, and they could still get kind of data connections out to apps like Twitter. So a type of GIS that was used there by disaster response agencies was to scrape Twitter for anybody that was sort of hashtagging that they were in trouble in that particular disaster, and to sort of look at what their tweet was saying and then feed that into a dashboard so that disaster response agencies could see where they were, because Twitter provides a location, that question of where, and also what was happening. So they were able to kind of get insulin supplies out to hospitals where they'd had their supply lines kind of cut. They could find people that were in remote communities to make sure that they got access restored to them and things like that. So basically anything that has this where component to it, GIS is probably going to be useful in terms of understanding it, but also helping other people to understand it as well.
Wow, and really great to hear like some real life examples and even see like the map of the different infections around with today, and as you said about tectonics as well. So really kind of like life is really used today to investigate so many things, and actually that's what's quite exciting about GIS is students are learning those skills in geography as well. So
Yeah.
going on to potentially like the NEA, but it could be kind of general field work as well, if students are listening about that. We
Mm-hmm.
know, well, as a teacher, that we're not actually taking many students out, or we might be taking them out, but there also might be more of an emphasis on secondary data, or I've actually used GIS also for primary data as well. But how can GIS be used to support students when they are answering hypothesis or collecting fieldwork, particularly when we're thinking about the NEA?
So I think the kind of the big takeaway here is to use it as much as you are comfortable with, and you know, for kind of what's appropriate in your project. And so different projects and different questions might be appropriate in different ways. So I've just popped on screen. This is kind of just the basic map interface that you get if you log into arcgis.com. So that's the GIS that kind of I work in and that I train people on. So one of the simplest things that you can do is actually to just explore somewhere that you're interested in inside the GIS, particularly at the moment if you're not able to get there physically. It just gives you an opportunity to actually go and look at a particular place. So I'm just going to sort of zoom in on the city that I live in, and I've got sort of a map interface that I can kind of move around and start to get a bit of a sense of what the place is like. And if I zoom out a little bit, you know, I can just switch my base map around. I can pop it into something like imagery here. And that's giving me really different information about this space. You know, the map itself, I could get some of the kind of land use functions there. I could see the street patterns really clearly, whereas the satellite imagery, I've got kind of the colours that are showing me the urban areas really strongly, and then sort of where the greenbelt sort of area comes in, you know, that this is rural landscape here. But actually, when I sort of look at it in a bit more detail, I can see these sort of nice sort of square fields. So this isn't totally wild country. Obviously, this is somewhere where it's being used for agriculture. And actually, I can even see from this sort of satellite imagery, kind of the plough lines, where they've got kind of arable agriculture. And I've got some little dots in the field here that are pretty likely to be sheep and cows and things like that as well. So it might seem really simple and straightforward, but I'm always a big fan of simple and straightforward. So one of the first things that you can do is literally just use this as a geography visualizer. Go and find a place that you're interested in, and actually start to really pick it apart, think about it like a geographer, and really understand your case study area. And you've got other little tools you can pick up as well. So the measure tool here, again, super simple, but it's just really helpful. You know, if you're going to actually get out there on foot and sort of walk down this road to do a transect, how far am I actually going to be walking? Is it something that I can cover kind of in a single day by myself, or am I going to need other people to kind of get out there with me, and help me with that? So there's those kind of aspects where I'm literally just sort of using the 2D map as a visualizer. I can also switch into 3D kind of view as well. So if I just click on Scene in ArcGIS, it will take me into a 3D environment where I can actually almost move through that landscape as if I'm sort of walking through it. And really straightforwardly, you know, if you've got these maps and you want to kind of use them as part of your NEA, you can just use the screen cap tool or the snipping tool in PowerPoint and in Word and things like that to take the maps that you need and kind of use them to sort of have as kind of a visual reference for your study areas. So that's kind of like some of the most simple, sort of straightforward way of using GIS, just as this geography visualizer. And I'd say, you know, if you've never really done much GIS before, then that's absolutely a valid way to kind of start using it and start to get yourself familiar with it, and kind of use it to your benefit in this NEA circumstance. But you can go a lot further as well. So inside ArcGIS Online, as well as these base maps that we can kind of just explore straight away, we can also look for other people's secondary data. So if I just search for some layers, I'm going to look for the index of multiple deprivation. So this is a data set that you may well come across as part of your A-level studies. It's a government data set in the UK. They kind of collect this data and they rank how deprived the different neighbourhoods are in England, in this case, relative to one another. So it gives you a sense of kind of compared to each other, you know, how deprived or sort of how not deprived a particular area is. So I can just add this data onto a map, and it's just dropped that down for me. And again, I can just kind of start exploring this, kind of moving around it, to start to get sort of a sense of the spatial pattern. I can click on things and it will start to bring up all the information for that particular neighbourhood. There's almost an overwhelming amount of information here because there's a lot of data that's been included. But the GIS can also make things a little bit easier for me, because at the moment this map is, for me anyway, it's just a bit overwhelming. I can't kind of get all of the data really out of it. You know, I'm going to have to really study to kind of understand places that I'm interested in. But I can take this kind of quite complicated secondary data and I can do something like apply a filter to it. So in this case, I'm just going to filter it. So I'm only going to look at places that are in Birmingham, essentially. So if I just type in Birmingham, and spell it correctly. So you can see it just took like all of that massive amount of data and it's just made me a much smaller map straight away. So I don't have to deal with kind of all of the stuff that's not relevant to my topic. I can just really quickly focus in on a place that I'm interested in. So if I've got a question where maybe I'm interested in how the different built environment is in kind of more deprived and less deprived neighbourhoods, I can immediately start looking at this now, and I can kind of sort of start to make my selection as to where I might go and do some sampling. So actually, kind of if I'm here in the middle of the city, there's maybe not kind of a lot of difference between the neighbourhoods here. So I probably want to come to where there's this kind of almost clear dividing line between areas that are less deprived and areas that are more deprived. And again, I could just pick up that measure tool and sort of figure out a transect or an area that's actually going to be feasible for me to personally go and kind of do some data collection in. So I think that's the sort of next step with GIS. Once you've used it as a visualizer, bring in some other data and actually start to think about your question in a bit more detail and figure out, how it is that you're going to be able to address it. And, actually sort of, has your question already been answered by other people's secondary data? And if it has, then maybe you sort of need to think about your hypothesis again and change it a little bit so that you're doing something that's a little bit more unique. So that's sort of use two. On from that as well, we can use GIS for data collection. I've kind of mentioned a couple of times. So this is just an app in the GIS called Survey 123, and I just can build my own little survey forms here that I can then package up and send out to anybody that I need to have them. So again, if we're doing a lot of virtual sort of field work, if we're not able to physically get everywhere we want to at the moment, this might be a way of getting around it because I can email this or people can access it on their mobile phone. And if they've got a mobile phone, they can also take this out into the field themselves. So they've not got to kind of do paper and clipboards, they can just put data straight in on the phone and immediately have access to it inside the GIS. So that's actually what's happened here. So this is a survey that a group of people took out a few months ago. And I can go and look at all of the data that they collect as it comes in real time. So this is kind of the data that they went out and collected. I can actually bring up these individual points. So, it's as if I have got their kind of clipboard, I can sort of see what they said for this specific area and any photos they collected and things like that. So it brings all of that sort of data collection technology together. But it also, if I want to, lets me export it out to Excel. So I don't have to spend any time doing data entry. It's all done for me and I can just export that to Excel and then do my stats or build my charts sort of based on that data. And I can take it back into a map viewer as well. So this is just going to sort of take me back into that map viewer that I was just using a few moments ago for the index of multiple deprivation. So if I just zoom in on my little points here, all of the things that I was able to do to interrogate my secondary data, I can do with my own primary data here as well. So I can start to change the way these points are styled. So I can get them to tell me, where were people on CCTV and where were people not on CCTV. So we're looking at kind of camera coverage here. And it also lets me sort of ask more sophisticated questions. So for example, is there a relationship between if you're on a CCTV camera and how you feel about that particular area? Because I can just add in another attribute. So, based on sort of what people experienced, did they think it was an area where there was high or low crime? So I can start to answer questions like, if there are security cameras there, do I kind of feel more or less reassured in terms of the crime in that area? So that's kind of a bit of a whistle-stop tour through, but from real simple basics like using the GIS as a visualizer, all the way through to using it to kind of collect and interrogate your own data, that's all available to you as a student, and it's all completely free as well.
And you have also just made it look so easy. I think there might be a bit of feedback coming back, but I think we're fine now. So wow, and so obviously you work with Esri, and students might have been seeing it once or twice, or they might be watching this and want to do more. Where can students go to kind of have some instructions on how to use GIS or develop their own skills in it? And then also just the people who are viewing, there's a question or two come through, but if you have any more questions, it might be relevant to a topic that you're studying, or any, just put them in the comments and we'll try and answer them as well. So over to you, Katie, if where can students go to kind of get help with GIS?
So, first and foremost, it's probably worth having a chat with your teacher and actually asking, if they're planning on using it, if they're going to be doing anything with you. And if they're not, then you can always kind of flag up that there are resources available for them. On a more personal note, there's the Esri UK schools website. If you just kind of Google, or other search engines are available, if you just kind of pop in Esri UK schools, you'll find our website, and there is a teaching resources page. So it's technically aimed at teachers, but pretty much everything in there will be accessible for a sixth form student as well. And there's some getting started resources. There's getting started with maps and data, and there's one called getting started with 3D maps, and another one that's getting started with Survey 123. And they're just sort of 2-minute videos that just take you through step by step. You can kind of click along and follow along with us as we're building things to help kind of build your skills, and get that for yourself. Another sort of way that I really recommend engaging with the GIS community, if you're on Twitter, you don't have to have an account where you tweet out. You can stay as a lurker. I did for years. But if you follow hashtags, so we will tweet things out with GIS4NEA as a hashtag if we think it's a resource that's really useful for that kind of student group. And you can often kind of pick up, there's a lot of geography teachers out there that will kind of be sharing resources. There's amazing channels like this that kind of, sort of advertise talks and other training opportunities like that. So I kind of recommend connecting sort of in that professional way through social media almost, to find some of these resources as well. If you really want to, there's also a Microsoft course where you can kind of get a little digital badge in all of this as well. So that used to, again, be pretty much just for teachers, but Microsoft sort of opened up their educator centre as part of their COVID response. So that became more available for families as well, and people that were teaching at home. So you should be able to find us in there too, if you want that kind of digital credential at the end to say that you kind of did the basic course there.
Super. And there's also a really good one which I often use for my students, and the first one they're doing is the crime data one, where you have to download crime data, which is actually a really good NEA one as well if you are looking at kind of urban areas, or so that you download the crime data for that particular month, and it is literally like a step by step. So the students I teach just kind of follow those instructions, and that's a really accessible resource as well. And then just looking at the kind of presentations that you've shown, it's like kind of no longer having to draw out by pencil or layers of tracing paper, which is kind of like the basic kind of geographical mapping, which is kind of what I did at school. So I think, as you said, like kind of getting your head around those, a bit how to use the software can actually mean your data presentation can look so professional as well.
Yeah, I think that's really key. And also you can really quickly redraw stuff. You know, when I was kind of making maps by hand when I was a student, once you've made one, like that's kind of where you want to stop sometimes, because the effort of creation could be quite intense. But because you can just really quickly switch through and kind of check different attributes, you know, you can sort of think through your data, and then you can spend some time making it look really beautiful, kind of ready to put into your kind of presentation work, sort of in Word or wherever it is that you're writing stuff up.
We're going to be talking about careers in a second. We have got a question from a viewer saying, because we've looked at urban areas and the index of multiple deprivation, are there any maps that you might recommend if there's anything on coast? So maybe like kind of coastal erosion, or obviously they could maybe see area from an aerial view, like the protection. But is there anything that you could recommend to students?
Yep, so if you're kind of in ArcGIS Online, which is the platform that I've been showing you, if you just search for some of the keywords around your topic, it will often bring up relevant resources. And then you can just kind of click and see who it is that's made those to see whether you feel it's a reliable source. But when it comes to coasts, there is a wealth of data out there for sure. The National Trust have put lots of their data up. There's a National Trust Explorer app where you can compare coastlines in the 60s to now, just on sort of some comparison comparison maps that they've made. As we've sort of mentioned, just using the scene viewer to kind of go into 3D and actually sort of almost fly over as if you were in a drone or a plane yourself, using some of that. A lot of kind of authorities actually publish their shoreline management plans, and they're available in ArcGIS Online. And there's a lot of data out there where even if it's not immediately inside the GIS, it's actually really straightforward to bring it in. So you've already mentioned crime data, but there's also sort of physical data sets that are out there too, that it's not much effort to kind of just sometimes it's as simple as just dragging and dropping and they just appear on the map for you. So kind of don't be afraid to get in contact with kind of agencies and ask them if they've got data sets, or just kind of have a search on the internet and see what you can find. And especially if you've done some of those basic courses, you'll probably have a bit of knowledge then about, oh, actually, this is going to be really easy to get into the GIS. I can actually look at this on a map for myself, and start to explore it that way.
That's really useful. Yeah. So as I said, there's just a bank of data, and it's sometimes companies who upload it. Is it individuals as well? Just everybody's contributing.
So basically anybody that has an ArcGIS Online account where they can share data can share it with other people. So every company that Esri works with tends to make data available. So people like NASA, the National Trust I've already mentioned, like Historic England and kind of similar bodies in Wales and Scotland, government data sets get in there. The Canals and Rivers Trust are another kind of like big group, the RNLI, they're all kind of putting data into there. So have a search, basically, see what's already in there. And if you can't quite find what you need, go to their websites and see if they've got portals and things like that, and you may well be able to bring it in as well.
Okay, so to summarize tips for NEA students, and you can correct or add on to that. One, check out the different layers that students can see on the actual ArcGIS website. Two, check out Twitter and particularly the hashtags on if there's anything to do with GIS NEA, because there might be new maps that they can maybe use. And three, if they need some further instructions after speaking to their teachers, they can look at the school resources and they can use them for kind of step-by-step guides. And there's also the course if they want to go further. Is that's our this
that's perfect. Great summary.
Brilliant. Okay, so hopefully that is super useful, because I know that a lot of you already use GIS, but also might be thinking about using more GIS to kind of weigh up the potential if you're not going out and investigating for as many days. Thank you so much, Katie. If we could just quickly have a bit on how did you, I know you mentioned a bit before about your background, but how did you get there and into your career? And also maybe just any, like, why is GIS also good for other careers as well? That'd be great.
So I had a slightly kind of convoluted route into a career in GIS, because I did geography A level, but actually there was a historical geography component to my A level that meant that I knew that I wanted to go and do a degree in archaeology. So that's actually where I first encountered GIS. I didn't get to use any at school, but when I was at university as part of my degree, we looked at kind of GIS to look at historic landscapes essentially, and I kind of followed that through, and as part of my master's and then as part of my PhD I kind of stuck with using GIS, but just as kind of for my own research, with a very sort of particular focus. And after I finished my PhD, I knew that I kind of didn't want to stay in academia exactly, and I trained to be a geography teacher, and that's kind of when I came back into geography. And I still had this interest in GIS, and there was some training that was made available to me as a trainee teacher where I met the Esri team, and started to see the web-based technology, and suddenly kind of realised the applications of it and just all the amazing stuff that you could do in that school's context. And so then I kind of had that contact with the team, and when a job came up with that team, I knew that I wanted to kind of do more development work around this and have that opportunity to kind of make resources and talk crazy passionately about kind of how exciting I find JS like today. So I applied for that job then, and got that job and became part of the team. So I'd say kind of the key thing was I didn't realise back at the start of all of that quite which skills I was developing were actually going to become so useful for my future career. So in terms of job advice, I think it's that effort is generally not wasted. And don't be afraid to kind of step sideways, and actually sort of try out a kind of new area if it's something that interests you and you can kind of make that skill connection too. I think for a lot of us these days, careers are not necessarily linear. It's not kind of you start one thing and you'll get to that finish line and be this be a specific kind of job anymore. I think kind of being aware of these opportunities to develop your skills and kind of build your skills portfolio is really important, and that's been kind of quite vital for me. In terms of the type of career that GIS can open up for you, it's almost a bit glib, isn't it? But kind of anything that you're interested in. So if you're kind of like passionate about environmental issues and you want to save the planet, there are lots of charities that kind of are using GIS to, have a real evidence-based approach that they can use to lobby governments and kind of work with supranational kind of institutions, that they can engage with volunteers on the ground. There's an awful lot of GIS involved in kind of refugee kind of camp management and development and tracking kind of the movement of people and making sure that they are as sort of safe and able to develop their own resources as much as possible. There's also kind of a lot of work that goes on with Indigenous groups who kind of use GIS. So it's often kind of quite surprising to people that they find that there are kind of Indigenous peoples in the Amazon that use GIS really widely. And again, that's often so they can kind of have the evidence about the land that they're using and present that to kind of government to sort of protect their landscapes. So there's all of those kind of examples. I already mentioned, I think, like The Witcher, where some of their sort of CG landscapes, they were built out of GIS as well. Gaming industry uses a lot of kind of GIS technology to build kind of landscapes. So if that's something you're interested in, it can take you that way. If you've got a business mind, then it's really intimately involved in business technology, because knowing kind of where people are spending money on particular products is really important to know where to put your shops and what you want to have in them. So again, there's kind of lots of sort of sales and sort of marketing and business aspects to the technology as well. There's education aspects, as like kind of I'm talking about. Basically, it just comes back to, if there is this where component, if you want to kind of know where stuff is, and almost everything that we deal with in a modern context, we do want to know where it is. GIS has some relevance there. So kind of any direction you go in, I kind of guarantee at this point you'll probably find there's a connection with GIS somewhere. And if you've got those skills, sometimes that can be your kind of backdoor route into a whole new industry, because the skills are really in demand. Our company is sort of generally recruiting. It's more trying to find people, to fill vacancies. And that's kind of, I think, true across most of the geospatial sector at the moment. We're a sector that's growing, that's expected to continue growing. There's going to be a lot of jobs available for people, and we want to have everybody on board.
Wow, and yeah, so many careers, as you said. If it's anything to do with the like where, then, and the gaming as well. So yeah, so it could be anything. So really building up these skills, and yeah, be very high demand. Good also if you're putting on your personal statement as well. Probably if you're applying to university, if you have been using it independently.
Yeah, I've actually, there's a nice example I've seen where some students have made story maps as kind of digital CVs. So as well as submitting their UCAS statement, they're able to submit a link, and it's like, look at my work, almost look at my portfolio, look at some of the things that I've already created. And that isn't just students who've applied to do straight geography. We've even had sort of like medical students that have done kind of like little studies about sort of infection in their community and things like that, and they've just been able to kind of give that over as a resource for their interviewers at unis to just immediately see and explore. It's a really nice kind of conversation piece sometimes for those interviews, where they get to really unpack everything they did.
Wow. Well, thank you so much for taking the time. And yeah, as you said, you made it look very easy, but I'm sure that when students kind of build up the skills, they'll also find it really straightforward as well. And looking forward to seeing, well, particularly some of my students there who are watching now, some of their future GIS mapping as well. So a massive thank you, and hopefully you'll have the people looking at you on Twitter. And just so we know, for next week, we're back to universities So we are joined by at Durham with hopefully some students at 5 p.m. and then Aberystwyth at 6:30. So if you're thinking about applying for geography at university, then check this out. I'll put some information on social media, but yeah, there should be some really, really good ones. So from me, have a fantastic week. Sorry, there's a few like glitches through one part, but absolutely fantastic interview with Katie. So have a lovely rest of your week and see you next week when we're talking to universities.